project really come to life. It has been incredible, the amount of work that folks have put into this project, and we're really proud. So we're excited for you to hear from everyone today and to really engage and to further this conversation locally. So welcome.
Great. Thank you, Kyla. My name is Christian Granlund. I am a manager at Puget Sound College and Career Network. I've had the privilege of being a project manager for this project, and we're excited to be here today with you all. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items and reminders. Be sure to mute your microphone. We also want to let you know that the presentation will be recorded, so if you don't want to have your face on screen, be sure to mute your video as well. As Kyla alluded to, we're going to have multiple presenters throughout this, so we hope you don't get disoriented or anything. Folks will introduce themselves as they enter the presentation, but in the spirit of collaboration, we wanted to have a good portion of our project management team here to share everything we learned with you. So you're going to get to see a lot of faces and get to meet the folks who are behind all of this great work. And then lastly, we're going through a lot of content today. We know you may have questions throughout. Somebody should be entering a link in the chat right now as a place for you to enter your questions. We're going to do our best to answer those questions that get prioritized. If you can go in there and look, if there's questions that you have, you can upvote those, and those will kind of move to the top. So we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Also, feel free to use the chat. We'll do our best to manage the chat as well. If you have a quick clarifying question, you can enter that, and we'll do our best to respond to that. But we have a lot of folks here today, so we didn't want anything to get lost. All right, honoring student and racial ethnic identities. One thing we want to make sure that's mentioned, in the study, we unfortunately didn't have the ability to disaggregate data by ethnicity. The categories listed are sourced from ERDC, which is OSPI, and from districts. We do want to acknowledge that these categories often minimize and erase the drastically different experiences of students and subpopulations within these broad race categories. Specifically in this report, there's certain findings where you see Asian students appear to be experiencing levels of academic success. And while this is true for some students, and we want to acknowledge that, it's also important to know that there are more than 20 subpopulations under the category of Asian, all which have unique experiences and face unique challenges. So we encourage each of your districts or colleges to disaggregate data based off your specific community context and what makes sense for you. So we encourage you to do that. Some objectives and outcomes for today. By the time you leave this presentation, we want you to understand, reflect, and find connections to your own work around the scope of our research study, our research findings, and our recommendations. Have a clear understanding of how to improve placement practices by exploring opportunities to move recommendations forward within your specific context. So that's what we hope you take away from our time. And then just real quickly, going through our agenda, we're going to talk about different areas of the findings, looking at student impact, student feedback, institutional practices, and this bigger piece of how incremental changes is not going to help us reach our goals. We'll talk about our recommendations, have time for questions and discussion, and then we have a call to action for all of you, and then we'll go into some of our toolkit and some of our more actionable items, and hopefully give time for breakout and conversation as well. And then I just want to quickly highlight the great partners in this work. So Community Center for Education Results, they're a nonprofit, and they helped, they're a nonprofit serving as the backbone for the Roadmap Project. CCR helped lead 2 out of 3 of our studies, as well as helped with communication support. Highline College also led one of the other studies. And you'll get to hear from Shannon, who was our senior advisor for the project, as well as helped facilitate our advisory board. And then again, I'm representing PSCCN today. We are the post-secondary team at Puget Sound Educational Service District, and our role was providing project management, grant management, as well as supporting partner engagement and dissemination. And then also want to acknowledge our advisory board. You can see all the different partners we had involved here. They really served as a sounding board for us, helped inform our research methodology, helped us in the sense-making process as we were discovering new data and new findings. And they also helped with the multiple rounds of editing and revision. So much appreciation for the advisory board. Next, I'm going to pass off to Brock Grubb.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brock Grubb. I'm an independent consultant. I had the privilege to support this work, support some of the research activities, as well as some of the report writing, and just huge gratitude for being here today. It means the world to us, and we're really excited to share with you. I want to start just by placing this work in context, and in particular, acknowledging that there are a lot of people working on these issues, and that there are a lot of people who have been working on these issues for a long time, and just sort of name that this is sort of part of a community of folks who are dedicated to issues of student success and racial equity. Locally, of course, you know, Shannon will talk about the Highline story in a little bit, but we know that there are other K through 12 districts, other colleges in the roadmap region who are committed to these issues and who have been for a long time and are actively pushing to improve student success and reduce inequity in the education system. We also need to acknowledge the work that's happening across the state. Other colleges and other districts in the state are playing huge and really important leadership roles. Also want to give a special shout out to the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges for all the work that they've done through efforts like Placement 360, directed self-placement, placement reciprocity, the higher ed partnership agreement around the smarter balanced assessments. So a lot of activity at the state level that we need to acknowledge and just express our appreciation of. And then also there's a robust national conversation focused on these issues that we also need to name and situate this work within. The upshot of a lot of these efforts is naming that, you know, credentials are crucial to access living wage jobs. And this is especially true in this moment with the pandemic, but too few students complete. And in the roadmap region, we know that fewer than half of students who enroll directly from high school complete any kind of credential within 4 years. And we know as well that pre-college courses are a big barrier to student success. And for this reason, the assessment and placement process is really crucial and something that's worthy of deep interrogation. In 2018, I had the privilege of working alongside Dr. Jose Hernandez and the CCER team on a report called To and Through, where we looked at student pathways from roadmap districts into and through community colleges in the region. And through this effort, I was able to connect with Shannon Waits, who many of you know, and who was doing some really exciting work at Highline College that really became an inspiration. They did a lot of work focused on the assessment and placement process at their college that had an immediate and significant impact. And so I'm actually going to pass to Shannon to share a little bit more about the Highline story.
Thanks so much, Brock. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Brock, for placing this research report into the context of so much effort that has gone into addressing the inequity inherent in placement processes and practices. And it's important to know that these attempts to change the system, that they've been occurring and to change the system that's been harming students, really in order to inform how we move forward. So hi, everybody. My name is Shannon Waits, and I'm the Director of First Year Success at Highline College, formerly the Director of Assessment and Placement. So Highline College began addressing misplacement and inequity within the placement process almost 10 years ago as part of Achieving the Dream work that revealed the racial inequity in placement outcomes and the detriment that long pre-college pipelines had on students' trajectory. Our math and English departments had done curricular changes to shorten the pre-college pipeline, like many of you have here, and accelerated courses, essentially just addressing the impact post-placement that was felt in the classroom. In 2014, we began honing in on actual placement practices and policies as the next phase of serving students better. So some significant changes that launched us to begin to see some big data shifts were that our English department removed the writing component of the English placement test, which at the time was Compass. It was misplacing students, particularly students of color, into pre-college courses. We had completed a validation study that revealed that students' reading score was the best predictor of success, and that the writing score was actually leaving students out of college English who could have been successful. We began accepting high school transcripts for placement into English, and we centralized the process for placement into math courses, which before, for accepting math or high school transcripts for math placement, that was done through finding a faculty member in their office if they were there in order to get placement. So we centralized that to one office, that anytime somebody came through the testing center, they were asked if they graduated high school and if we could use additional measures. We implemented brush-up workshops to help students better understand and prepare for placement test content. We didn't want the test questions to be a got you moment. Instead, we wanted students to have an opportunity to refresh their skills and understand the stake of the placement test in order to place most accurately and learn something along the way. And finally, we launched a large-scale communication campaign to campus and our high school and community partners that highlighted and operationalized the range of new placement options. This was really key to ensure that students were using the alternative measures, and that those that were supporting students were talking about multiple measures for placement rather than one scary test. And these changes yield pretty immediate results. We can go to that next slide. So placement into pre-college math dropped from 83% in 2014 to 63% in just 1 year. So a 20% decrease. And then it has steadily been decreasing each year to about roughly 35%, which we've been at pretty steady since 2018. So 35% now of students are placing into pre-college math compared to 83%. Most importantly is that it had a really disproportionate positive impact on students of color. So for this subgroup in particular, in 2015, the percent of Black students 20 years old or younger who placed into college level math rose from 8% in 2014 to 34% in 1 year. And same as it, Asian and Pacific Islander students saw like a similarly positive 1 year increase into college math, placement into college math, about 22% to 48% increase. Also, placement into college level English rose from 60% in 2013 to 89% by 2016. We reduced a long-standing equity gap, and course successes in both math and English remain consistent despite kind of staggering numbers of new students being able to take the courses. And next slide. So after these years of seeing such huge data leaps at Highline, we wanted to go deeper, which is also a piece of how this research report started to take shape. Getting a call from Brock, who was very interested in this and talking about sort of what we wanted to know more about what, if any, long-term impacts more access to college courses had on student success, such as credit attainment, significant milestones of persistence and completion of gateway courses like math and English. And then what about students at other schools? How widespread was misplacement in the roadmap region in particular, and which racial and ethnic groups are being most impacted? Most importantly, we wanted to hear from students about their experience with assessment and placement processes across the region. And so those were the three sort of goals of this research. And with that, I will hand it over to Brian to begin to share some of our findings around student impact.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. And hi, everyone. My name's Brian. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a data analyst with CCR and got to do a lot of the data analysis in this report. And and right now I'll be going over some of the impacts that we saw of current placement practices on students. And the findings that we'll be going over include that students of colors are overrepresented in pre-college course taking. Taking 2 or more pre-college courses is detrimental to the success of students in completing college level math. Students of color have been disproportionately placed into pre-college courses, even when their high school transcripts make them eligible for college level courses. And then the fourth is that we saw that these racial disparities persisted regardless of high school GPA or course taking. And then, So the first finding was that students of color are overrepresented in pre-college course taking. And we saw that this was true in both college level English with English and with math as well. Students of color from the Roadmap Project region made up about 70% of direct enrollees. But when we looked at students who took at least one pre-college English course, we saw that students of color made up 84% of those direct enrollees. So there was about 14 percentage points of disproportionality when we looked at that. And then this graph here looked at the extended pre-college course taking rates among students in pre-college math course taking. And we saw that rates were higher for students of color, particularly our Black, Latinx, and Native American students with extended pre-college course taking rates of over 50% within their first 2 years of enrollment. And that additional pre-college course taking carries with them both time and financial costs. And another thing that we found in our analysis was that students who took 2 or more pre-college courses also had a reduced likelihood of earning a 2.0 or better in the first college level math course that they took. So in our analysis, we ran a logistic regression model to analyze the different course taking factors that were associated with success in college level course taking in math. We controlled for different course taking factors like pre-college course taking, cumulative high school GPA, as well as high school math course taking. And we also controlled for other factors like race, gender, full-time status, among others. And we found that 2 or more pre-college course taking was a significant factor in reducing the likelihood of a student earning a 2.0 or better and earning credits in their first college level math course. And in this graph here, which looks at the percentages of students who earn a 2.0 or better, disaggregated by the number of pre-college courses taken, we saw that the rate of students, or you'll see that the rate of students is the highest among students who had no pre-college course taking. And as you look at each additional pre-college course that's taken, you see that the rate of students earning the 2.0 or better kind of decreasing with each additional college level course, with each additional pre-college course. And then one thing to note about this data is that this is only the rate among students who attempted a college level course. So one thing that isn't in this data point is that we saw that 3 in 5 students who attempted a single pre-college course a single pre-college course or more did not end up taking a college level math course within the first 2 years of enrollment. And then next, we wanted to share the experience of one of the students who participated in one of our study's listening sessions. And this Latinx student who was on a transfer pathway at Bellevue College shared that the first time I took the math placement test, I got math 98, algebra, which I was not willing to take again because I had already taken it in high school. And in order for me to retake, I had to take 30 or 40 hours of online practice, which was time that I did not have to spare. Plus, I had to wait 2 years for the first test to be invalid. I placed even lower at that point. I think it was 78. And I was like, I'm just going to have to take the class because I can't waste any more time trying to do math because that was the last thing that I needed. Because the math placement test placed me all the way to math 78. I was stuck there and then stuck with another class that was very similar to it until I was able to take my 107 class. I ended up taking 3 or 4 math classes that I did not need because of the placement test. And unfortunately, in our analysis, we saw that this student's experience was far too common. Students of color are disproportionately placed into pre-college courses, even when their high school transcript made them eligible for college placement. And we saw that underplacement in math courses in general was very high. Close to 1 in 3 students who were eligible to take a college level math course ended up taking 1 or more pre-college math course. And this rate of underplacement was especially high among many of our students of color and was most pronounced for our Black, Latinx, and Pacific Islander students, where close to 2 in 5 students were being underplaced. And then one thing to note about this data, or that prior data point, was that the data for Native American students was suppressed due to smaller counts of students to protect student privacy under FERPA. And then we also saw that underplacement wasn't something that was unique to math. As a whole, the rate of underplacement was lower among English course taking. We saw the rate of underplacement was 13% among students who were eligible for college level courses based off of their high school GPA. But similar to math, we found that the underplacement rate was highest among our region's students of color. And the underplacement again was especially high among our Black and Pacific Islander students who were underplaced in English at rates of 20% or higher. And then as we dug deeper, we saw that this underplacement for students of color persisted regardless of course taking in high school, as well as the student's high school GPA. Among students, so on the left-hand side, among students who had a 3.0 or higher cumulative high school GPA, which is a GPA that's high enough to place into college level English based on all of our region's current transcript-based policies. We saw that students of color took 2 or more pre-college courses at twice the rate of their white peers. And this underplacement was most pronounced among our Black and African-American students, where 14% of Black students who had a 3.0 or higher cumulative high school GPA ended up needing to take 2 or more pre-college courses. And then similarly, when we looked at math course taking, when we looked at students who took calculus in high school, students of color also took 2 or more pre-college courses at twice the rate of their white peers, with 9% of students of color taking 2 or more pre-college courses compared to 4% among white students. And all in all, this evidence made clear that placement, which includes the policy, the implementation, and ongoing practices of evaluation, has been racist and that it has perpetuated inequities between racial groups, even when students' course taken in high school indicates that they should be prepared and ready for college level courses. And then now I'll pass it over to Mercy, who will be sharing more about what students have shared with them about their experiences with placement processes.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mercy Daramola. I'm a manager with the Puget Sound College and Career Network, and it's been my pleasure to be a part of this research team, really digging into the findings and also being able to hear directly from students and young people about their experience with placement across the region. So before I jump into the student feedback, I also want to remind folks, if you haven't already, the links in the chat allow you to ask questions. So feel free to use that link or just pop your questions directly in the chat so you can be able to engage in real time. So the research team grounded our work in both our research, our findings, and recommendations in student feedback and experience. So we had over 300 students who engaged in both the survey and in interviews, so we can learn from them what their experience was or has been with placement. And some of the findings we see here are, one, that students report that the assessment and placement process is confusing to them and they want to change. As the primary customers, as primary people who are engaged in that experience, it's really important to be able to see the data that we're seeing in the findings, not just as anonymous data that it's from folks who aren't engaged, but actual students who are paying and spending time in our local education systems. And the students also have shown that those who place by high school transcripts are more likely to avoid pre-college courses and have a better placement experience overall when compared to students who place by the standardized placement tests. And so knowing that students experience both the policies that are underlying our placement processes, but also the practitioners who implement those policies is really important to think about as we're looking at what students are saying and experiencing both in the data and in their own words. And speaking of students' words, here's a quote from a student about their experience with the placement process. So Latinx Kent School District graduate who is studying design at Green River College shared that they wish that the school told them beforehand that they're able to use high school transcripts to place in English and math classes instead of taking the test and being placed in a class that puts you behind. So really thinking about how do we communicate to students the requirements and the processes that they will be encountering as they go through the placement and entry into college. So one of the findings that we see here is that supports the confusing experience that students experience when they're doing placement, shows that nearly half, or about 43% of students, were unaware that they could use their transcripts for placement. And so questions to consider is, where are we marketing awareness for what the placement process looks like for students? Who's leading these placement processes, marketing? And then how are students supported as in understanding the what, the why, the when, and the how of placement? Knowing that students really go through this experience of placement one time. So it's new to them the first time, but those folks of us who are in the system on an ongoing basis, what roles do we play or can we play to make sure students are aware about what the requirements and the processes are to be able to place into college courses? Another finding shows that students who place by high school transcript are more likely to also avoid pre-college courses and have a better experience overall. So as you can see in the data, we're seeing that some things that students responded when asked about the evaluation of their overall experience said that they found it burdensome, overwhelming, and lacking key information that will allow them to be successful. It was challenging until they were able to get navigation support. And then some students also saw some positive or stress-free experiences. So really want to emphasize the role of both policies of our placement processes, but also the role of practitioners, the people, really are also really crucial and critical when it comes to students' experience in the placement process. And then finally, when we look at thinking about the long-term impact of students overall, really thinking about their experience in those placement courses or the placement process does also have an impact long-term in the students' likelihood to both feel connected to their college campuses, but also be successful in attaining the credential or their educational path that they're choosing while they're enrolled. So both we should see an urgency in the data because it's showing that their students are currently in real time experiencing challenges, but also we should have a heart for how we can really support and empower students to really be successful from entry all the way through graduation in our local colleges. And I will pass it over to Natasha.
Thank you, Mercy. Hi, I'm Natasha Rosenblatt. I'm the Data Strategy Director at CCER, and I worked with Brian in the study where we, reviewed the transcript-based placement policies at each of the local CTCs, and then analyzed both the high school and the college transcripts of roadmap projects students to understand potential misplacement in the roadmap region. Among the things we found were that one, access to college courses is more dependent upon where the student attends a community college than their prior course taking. And two, that the inequities in the K-12 system perpetuate the inequities in the college placement outcomes. Excellent. And while there are strong feeder patterns within our region, students from each of the districts within the roadmap project region are going to each of the different many of the different colleges within our region. And while CTCs are available to each of these students, as you can see in this table that shows placement policy applicability for each of the different districts, there's some colleges that only allow transcript-based placement for certain students that come from certain districts within the region. So a student that goes to one college within the region may be able to place using their transcript, but at a neighboring college, they wouldn't be able to use that. In addition, each college placement policy has different eligibility criteria. So for math, this often relies on combinations of which math course was taken, when it was taken, and the grade that was received in that math course. This figure highlights the multiple challenges that result from both the region's inconsistent and also the restrictive transcript-based placement policies for math, especially. In this analysis, we looked at potential placement of roadmap project high school graduates, regardless of whether they entered a CTC. When we analyzed the high school transcripts for these graduates, we looked at how they would place at each of the different colleges based upon the existing transcript-based placement policy that was available on that policy, the college website as of January 2020. Based upon each college's policy, this figure estimates which proportion of each of these high school graduates would, as in green, place into college level math, and blue could use their transcripts but would be placed into pre-college math, or orange, they were ineligible to use their transcripts because their math history didn't meet the criteria to allow them to use their transcripts. So they may have not taken a high enough level of math, or their grade or their timing didn't meet the criteria. And then gray is the CTC had no transcript available for the graduate with for that district where the student graduated. So these are the places without the check marks in the prior table. So I want to walk through a couple different scenarios just to give an example. So in this case, this is a Seattle Public School graduate who got a B in Algebra 2. At Bellevue College, they were able to place into college level math. At Highline and Seattle colleges, they would have been able to use their transcript but would have placed into pre-college. And at Green River, this college wouldn't have accepted transcripts for students who graduated from Seattle Public Schools, according to their website. And then when we look at this Kent School graduate who got a C in calculus, at Green River, they would have been able to place into college level math, having that C in calculus. At Bellevue and Highline colleges, they would have been ineligible to use their transcript for placement, that calculus for placement, because they got a C, but had they gotten a B minus or better, they would have been able to place into college level math. And so they were ineligible using that course. They may have been able to use like a prior course, like a pre-calculus or an Algebra 2, depending upon if they met the criteria for that. And then at Seattle colleges, they didn't allow transcripts for students that graduated outside of Seattle Public Schools. So as the students have said, the placement process is indeed confusing. Let's see. I will answer that question in just a second. And let's see, maybe I can pause for a second. Why were students being made to take pre-college? That's a great question. And let's pause on that in a little bit because, well, they would be taking pre-college courses. If the college could use the transcript for placement, it may say you can use it, but based upon this college course that you took or the grade that you received, that gives you eligibility into this math course, but the math course is not a college level math course. To answer the question that was on the board. Okay, so back to when we look at, in addition to the differences in the college placement policies, we also see that students of color have disproportionately lower access to college-ready math in high school. So this chart shows the highest level of math that roadmap graduates took, roadmap college graduates, I'm sorry, between 2014 2017 took in high school. So these are each of the groupings according to what we were able to find from the transcript-based policies. So in orange, this no eligible math. This is a math course that wasn't found on any of the different policies that we found, or the student didn't take math within the roadmap project region. As you can see, Algebra 2 is frequently the highest, in this dark blue, is frequently the highest level of math that students of color took in high school. And then when we focus on these down here that are outlined in purple, we see that pre-calculus and calculus, these higher level math courses, there's definitely disproportionality in access to these courses, with less than 1/4 of the Native American, Latinx, and Black students being able to have access to these courses. And these disparities have an impact. So these CTC placement policies in general require a B or better in pre-calculus or calculus, or an A or better in Algebra 2 for placement into college level math. Next slide, please. And we see these inequities play out when looking at college level placement eligibility among direct enrollees. So this graph shows the percent of students who were met the criteria for placement into college level math at the CTC where they enrolled. So in all, policies that on the surface appear race neutral based upon grades and math course taking can actually perpetuate the racial inequities from the K-12 system. And when we looked at college level eligibility for English and using the high school and a cumulative GPA, we saw similar patterns. At this point, I'd like to hand it back to Brian to share the next finding that we found in trying to look at alternative methods for placement.
Awesome. Thank you, Natasha. So the last finding that we'll be sharing with you is that we found that incremental changes to transcript-based policies can improve access to college level courses, but are unlikely to address large-scale racial inequities. So if we go to the next slide, this graph comes from the technical report that accompanies the Inequity by Design report, where we share our methods for each of our studies, as well as we go more in detail into the process that we took to exploring these different hypothetical or alternative placement policies. So we explored a bunch of different potential course taking and GPA criterias to try to see if there was a way that we could kind of tweak existing policies or create kind of different placement policies with the effort to increase access to college level courses, as well as closing the racial gaps that we saw in the previous slide when it comes to college level eligibility for math. So from that previous slide, kind of the level that we were starting with was that college level eligibility was set at 25% among all students, and 21%, and there was a 21-point eligibility gap between the highest and lowest eligibility rates across race and ethnicity. So this graph just kind of shows one of our first steps through that process, where we did start by just expanding the grade criteria of the existing policies, which were often centered around Algebra 2, pre-calculus, and calculus course taking. We kind of incrementally stepped it up, and the graph here shows kind of what access to, or what college level eligibility would be if the requirement for college level math was to earn a C or better in Algebra 2 or higher. And due to the inequities that Natasha had mentioned previously, we can see that by kind of changing these grade requirements, we are able to increase access, but there still are large gaps that still exist across race ethnicity, with a 15-point gap between Black African-American students and Asian students. We then kind of expanded the prospective policies that we're looking at to also factor in GPA. So GPA is a criteria that is used at some CTCs in Washington State, and we wanted to factor in GPA to try to see if there was ways that we could, with the additional criteria, be able to increase college level eligibility across race ethnicities. And we were able to, or we tested multiple different kind of cutoffs. And one of the cutoffs that we kind of saw was at a high school GPA of 1.92, or having a student also earn a C or better in Algebra 2 or higher. When we kind of use the union of those two criteria, we did see that eligibility rates were able to be increased to over 80% across all race ethnicities, and the eligibility gap was able to be reduced to within 10 percentage points. And we also did a similar exploration among English policies, and what we kind of found was similar across both math and English was that access could be increased as you kind of tweak and change the different grade requirements or GPA requirements. However, the eligibility gaps don't start to close significantly until the criteria is set in a way where nearly all students are eligible for college level placement. And then next, I'll pass it over to Brock.
Thanks so much, Brian. So as we just outlined, our team tried really hard to find this magic combination of placement criteria using grades and course taking that could achieve both the access goals and the equity goals. But we couldn't get there unless we broadened the criteria so much that they granted near universal access. And we really struggled with this as a research team and sort of tried to do some sense making and what does this mean? And it got us to thinking, what if access was universal for recent high school graduates and access to college level courses, and why shouldn't it be? And we went back to the Washington State Ed Code, and there's, it's very clear. It spells out that the purpose of a high school diploma is to declare that a student is ready for success in post-secondary education. And so, we sat with this as a research team. What does that mean to value a high school diploma as a measure of college readiness? And we thought about all of this within the broader context of these assessment and placement policies. In the report, we cite Ibram Kendi's work. And if we take seriously his definition of a racist policy as one that produces or sustains inequity, it becomes hard to view the current paradigm and current policies as anything but racist. So what do? We think that leaders who are committed to racial equity locally across the state have a choice to make, whether they want to reinforce the existing paradigm or find a new framework. And that new framework should center students, use a policy design that's explicitly anti-racist, and provide support for students in an equitable way. So I'm going to pass it to Christian to outline that path.
Great, thank you for that description and explanation, Brock. So this first recommendation that we came up with was essentially a recommendation for a paradigm shift. What would this look like in our state? We landed on CTCs make placement into college level courses the default for all recent high school graduates. And Brock explained much of our reasoning behind that. And like he said, going through this process, we tried hard. We were really hopeful that we were going to find that silver bullet of GPA and course taking, where we could just, prescribe the right thresholds, placement thresholds, and we'd be good. But that wasn't the case. And so our focus then shifted to how do we remove barriers instead of adding to this complex web of current policies that is already confusing for students and is showing through the data that is not supporting students through this process. So our considerations for why we would do a statewide approach, first and foremost, we need to expedite the implementation of this in order to minimize the harm that is currently happening to students of color. We also thought there were other benefits of a statewide approach in terms of aligning relevant policies between the K-12 system and the post-secondary system. We highlighted some of those challenges of the course taking in the high school system and how that impacts students going through the placement process. Develop systems of accountability in order to actively track and address these equity gaps. So are we actively monitoring these data points to see if we're able to make gains in this area? As far as we know, this is the first type of study looking at these high school indicators and college outcomes. And then leverage lessons learned from colleges who have proactively sought to address equity gaps in the placement process. I do want to acknowledge many colleges in the state have tried new things, and we think there's opportunity to learn from those colleges. Support the implementation of related statewide policy initiatives, such as guided pathways. We know that's a huge priority for our CTCs right now. And there are definitely connections between guided pathways and this work, as well as shifting our philosophy and our resources, our institutional resources, from practices that support a gatekeeping philosophy to practices that support targeted and holistic student support. So we gave you the reasoning for why a statewide approach and why providing default access. This is more reasoning for what we think the benefit of a statewide implementation could be. And then we gave more, there were a lot of findings as well around like specific actions that, while we're waiting for big system level paradigm shift, there are things that colleges, districts can do right now to help support their students. So center students of color in the redesign of placement practices and ensure that they experience the enrollment and placement process as welcoming, trusting, and empowering. So a shift in our current philosophy and mindset. Transform placement practices and transcript-based placement policies to maximize student access to college level courses. We know that transcript-based placement isn't necessarily perfect, but there is room for improvement to create more access and create some more equity. But like we said, it is not, we do not consider it the end all be all, the silver bullet in terms of where placement and assessment can go to. And then investigate and acknowledge the impact of current placement practices on students of color, and investigate and acknowledge the impact of inequitable grading distribution and access to math for students of color in K-12. So that is our breakdown of the specific recommendations, actionable recommendations for districts and CTCs. We do have in the report, we do have action steps, and a little later, Shannon will be discussing the toolkit, which provides multiple, we have different layers of recommendations, and we really want to empower you, regardless of what level of leadership you're at and your connection to placement and assessment, empower you to take action in whatever capacity you have the ability to do so. So now we have time for Q&A. Let's see, is anybody who's monitoring the Q&A, our repository there of questions, do we have any questions that are rising up to the top?
I see one, and Natasha, I'm not sure how much you answered this of why were students being made to take pre-college courses if the college uses transcripts for placement?
So yes, I'm happy to jump in a little bit more and answer that. So so there's two answers to this. One is sort of in the section that Brian was presenting about underplacement. And then there's the piece about potential placement. So colleges, first of all, in terms of just in general placement, colleges can have transcript-based placement policies that have different levels of eligibility in there. So some eligibility is you're eligible for placement into math, but it's not college level. So it could be that you could be placed into something that's just below college level or a few steps below college level. The other piece is students could be actually eligible for college level math, as in the section that Brian was presenting. And what we were showing is this is the potential for their placement into college math using their transcripts, but the students may not have been told about the transcripts option for transcript-based placement, or they may have been told that they had to take a test or something like that. They may have never known that there is the option for transcript-based placement. And that's where there's a lot of other inequities that we're seeing. And as Brian was mentioning about across the process, who's got the information, who's sharing the information, how much do people across the advising staff know about the options for transcript-based placement, and how much are they sharing that, and with which students are they sharing it? Are they sharing it equitably across the campus?
We have another question that Mercy posted. What kind of information or processes do community colleges need to put into place to overcome the belief that a placement test is an inaccurate representation of student skill level? What might a cost-benefit analysis show are the pros and cons of relying on placement tests? Do we have anybody from the project management group who wants to jump in on that question?
I can try. I think that one piece with, so information or processes, I do believe that we have empirical evidence that shows that a test is not an accurate representation of a student's skill. I think we see that with our, even our higher ed partners that are, taking away SAT and ACT for entrance. These tests have been proven over and over again to not be valid and to instead really impact students of color, low-income students, women in particular. So in terms of the information, I think we have the information. In terms of the belief, that's sort of a deeper seated thing, right? So I think first, are the colleges looking at their data? Are they looking at the data of how students do in the courses based on what scores that they get on a test? Are they also comparing that against students who might not have taken the test and entered in either, on their own or through taking a prerequisite course? And then in terms of a cost benefit analysis showing the pros and cons, I feel that, again, there is that empirical evidence, and part of this report also shows that cost benefit analysis in terms of student lives, in terms of students being charged more for courses that they don't need to take. In terms of the data that we saw from the 2 and 3 report that shows that, roughly 30% of our high school graduates complete a college degree within however many years post-graduation. So I think that there is that information out there. I think it is that will to move forward to say, okay, we have this information and we are now going to, in both the students who have been undersold and overcharged, and also in the data that has forever shown that these tests are invalid, are not great predictors.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Do we have any other questions we want to address while we're here? What is considered a recent, or let's see, there's a couple questions. Was there disaggregation based on student age? Do we want to consider different placement options, strategies for students who are 20 years away from formal education versus those who are recent high school grads? And what is considered a recent high school graduate within 1 year of graduating, question, etc.
I can answer that as well. So we specifically looked at direct enrollees because it was a really clear way of sort of keeping a clear definition of, like, here are students that are really coming, that cohort is kind of as similar as possible. And so that's what we really focused our work on. Students who were coming right out of high school. And yeah, that is within 1 year of graduating. So we didn't do further disaggregation. We really kind of honed our study on direct enrollees or recent graduates. But that is an opportunity for further investigation.
Great, and let's do one more question and then we'll move on. Ultimately closing equity gaps to access is important, but closing completion gaps is more important. Does your research demonstrate that increasing access does improve completion gaps, not course completion on its own?
Can I take that one, Christian?
Yeah, go for it.
So that that's one of the points that the research team was circling around as we were thinking about how to present the findings, but also as we were sitting in the research too, and even framing the question as equity being separate from anything else is where we didn't want to end up, because what we see in the research is pretty clear that if our students are being charged more and staying in college longer, and not be able to get into the courses that they should be able to get into because of their race, because they're Black and brown students in the region, that's the core issue that we're thinking of. If a student can't even get in, can we even have the conversation about completion? So I think that being able to look at the entry requirements and the gateway into our local colleges being something that is a narrower, if not closed door for our students, that's the conversation we should be really thinking about, because that impacts how they even are able to get to completion. If a student is seeing either policies or folks implementing policies that communicate the message that their education before coming in is not enough, then what message are they getting about, like, even wanting to stay in and to be able to complete? So yeah, that was something that we wanted to make sure was clear in the data that we saw, that equity is not just a placement issue, but it's also a completion issue together.
I appreciate that, Mercy. I wanted to just add one more thing. So I think Mercy's absolutely right. We see equity and success as inextricably linked, and we need to help more students, and in particular students who are being disproportionately placed into pre-college courses, access college level courses as quickly as possible. But I was also just going to add one more thing, which is this is about assessment and placement, which is the starting line of a marathon to completion. And one of the things that our research team really focused in on and that we spent a lot of time grappling with is just fixing this placement referral issue. You know, are you pre-college level or college level, does not ensure later student success. And I just saw someone put in the chat a reference to guided pathways. And we really see the guided pathways work, which we know the state and many colleges are actively working on now, as essential as a sort of complement to any work that's going to be done around the assessment and placement process at the colleges.
Great, thank you for that follow-up, Brock. I'm seeing a lot of great comments, questions in the chat. I want to encourage more engagement in the chat. So we're going to keep moving forward, but feel free to keep chiming into that chat. We're also going to have a chance for breakouts a little later. So you'll have, if you have ideas rolling through your head right now, you're going to have opportunity to share with others a little later. So thank you for this engagement. We really appreciate it. All right. Let's see, Mercy, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Awesome. So we wanted to take a chance to, as folks got a chance to both hear the findings and kind of sit in the space where we are now, where you're starting to think about what can we do, what can't we do, what power do folks have, what who wasn't involved in the research, all the things that are coming up in your mind. We wanted to get a chance to both get a snapshot, but also have us pause and reflect a little bit. So there is that link that you see on the slide. If you go to menti.com and input the code 54120025, we want you to take a minute or so to answer two different questions. So the first question we want you to think about as an answer is, what are the reasons, what could be the reasons that would cause us to kind of slow down implementation of any of the recommendations or some of the things that we have proposed as ways to address the issue around placement. So like, what are some things that you're seeing as barriers? We want you to kind of sit in that space and answer a question around that. So if you are in that and you get a chance, so we'll give you like 2 minutes to really put your thoughts in that, what you see on the Menti screen.
Yeah, we'll give a little bit of time for folks to enter that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try and nimbly navigate to that page. All right.
Awesome. So yeah, as you see on the screen, Christian went to menti.com. Well, he has the presenter view, but if you go to menti.com and you enter into that, the code 54120025, and I'll put that in the link. You can't type more than a few characters, so it's going to force you to kind of wordsmith. But we see so far folks saying need more research, faculty pressure, planning buy-in, none. Why would we slow down? Yeah, so there's a lot coming up: bureaucratic inertia, fear. And this really isn't, there is no right or wrong answer, because one thing the research team, as we were both sharing the initial draft with folks, and even in our work, we're trying to grapple with what are some of the barriers or some of the roadblocks or guardrails that we aren't aware of as we did this research, and what are some of the things that we should push against, that even if they are there, the equity issue, the equity imperative is still something that is centered in this work. So I'll give folks a few more moments to put into the chat, and the more one or more words are entered multiple times, the larger it will become. So the largest one we see right here is none. So quite a few folks feel like there's no reason to slow down implementation. Some folks I see to get it right is something that's come up. And that's something, you know, we can talk about, like what does get it right mean when we think about students who honestly have been failed over time. I think get it right is something that we can't let be something that we are afraid of. Planning is another reason, pandemic data. So this is great. Great not being a value judgment, but great being able to see all the different things that are coming up for folks as we're thinking about possible implementations. So now let's move on to the next slide, because the second question we want you to think about is, what are the reasons why we can't wait? So when we think about the data that we saw, the work that folks on this Zoom and around the region and nation are already doing the work, why shouldn't we be waiting when it comes to implementing recommendations that change what is going on for our students when it comes to their pre-college course experiences? So we're seeing some things that are coming up that are students are reasons why we can't wait: equity, students deserve better, historic racism, economic stability, student success, life or death. We think about students' experience with access to post-secondary education and connection to long-term, really social, emotional, life, health improvements. Education is key, growing gaps. Equity is rising up justice. So I can narrate this in real time. And I also just encourage you all to let this soak in as you're seeing what's coming up for other folks about why we can't wait. I'm not sure if we have students on the line. If we do have any, welcome into this conversation today. But if we did have students in the line, what would you say to their faces why we can't wait as far as implementing the recommendations? All right, so let's a couple more squeezes of the lemon if there's any more juice in. Looks like students are still really the #1 reason why we can't wait. Much appreciated. And then, yeah, I'll pass it back over so we can continue moving on to our breakout rooms. So now as we move forward, we've had a chance to do some Q&A. The mentoring is a chance to be able to also share some of your initial thoughts. But now this is not an opportunity to have the research team get dressed up for the first time in the pandemic, talk to you about this research that we've been doing for a few years, and then we all pat ourselves on the back, log off, and go back to work. There's action that we want to make sure is behind this. There should be urgency behind what we see in the data and that you all are already seeing in your work. So we call on everyone here in the Zoom and in your networks as you connect with folks in this field to act collectively in partnership with students and use anti-racist approaches to correct the injustices across the education system. One thing that Brock mentioned earlier is we looked at a snippet, just a slice of the educational pipeline that our students and young people experience. And so we know that there's so many more things that connect, that inform, that are relying on what we saw in our data. But all of us who have a desire to eliminate racial equity gaps in college access, we have to utilize both our positional powers and our personal power so that we can prioritize the success and well-being of all students, but really hone in on students of color, those who have been placed most at risk of being negatively impacted by our current placement policies, practices, and mindsets. So I know it can feel big and it can feel overwhelming too when we think about the system that we're in, when we think about white supremacy and what it's meant for the data that we see today, that students who look like me, students who have my background, Black and brown students we see in the data, have been unjustly denied the opportunity to have a high quality access into and success in our college courses. That shouldn't stop us. We can still do something. So that's our call to action today. So I want you all to sit in that call to action, and then we're going to move forward to our toolkit.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mercy. A call to action without some clear next steps is really, we feel like we would be leaving you here without anything except for some really troubling data. And so we created a toolkit that I put in the chat. This toolkit is really here to support the implementation of the recommendations. So you will see, let me grab one more link here. There's both a web version and then there's also a printable PDF version. And the intention of this is to get to work, is to start this work, that this is easy to begin, and that we can really meet the urgency of the crisis with action rather than talk about what is needed to do. We feel that the answers are here and hope that the toolkit provides a roadmap to begin these bold steps. So a little bit about the toolkit, just so you all feel comfortable using it moving forward. Each recommendation has an aligned action with suggestions for implementing that particular action. So as seen here, we have it broken down for each stakeholder group that we identified as those who hold power in particular areas of influence. So for example, here for recommendation 2, we recommend that we transform placement practices and transcript-based placement policies to maximize student access to college level courses. The action for that is to eliminate underplacement, or one action for that recommendation is to eliminate underplacement through the utilization of transcript-based placement as the default method for all recent high school graduates. And so some steps for implementation that you can see there. So for CTC leaders, vice presidents, department, division chairs, department coordinators, presidents, we ask that you initiate a protocol that ensures college placement or enrollment staff review high school transcripts and other available measures as the default placement for high school graduates within the last 10 years. We believe that you have the power to do that, and this action, this step is there for you. For SBCTC and OSPI, the step here would be to investigate and pursue a statewide policy that makes college level placement the default for incoming students. We have some great examples of statewide policies around placement, and we implore you to use that as a roadmap to do a policy for college level placement for high school graduates. And then the final step for implementation for this piece of the toolkit for K-12 leaders is to ensure all students have access to unofficial and official transcripts when they graduate, and a digital access to it as well post graduation. So this is just one example of some of the steps that are in the toolkit. We understand that each campus and organization and stakeholders will have their own approach depending on many variables. We also ask that you remember that word cloud of why we can't wait. And so those pieces that are coming up around fear, around not resources to plan, around no time, we really feel that we've anticipated those needs and therefore made a very easy to follow toolkit that hopefully can be used as a collaborative tool. We hope that collaborations and coalitions form across stakeholder groups to really best tackle and sustain this movement that's needed towards racial justice that this report proposes. We know that if it was easy to change, it would have happened a long time ago. And but we now have over a decade of evidence and thousands of students, tens of thousands of students who've been overcharged and undersold on their ability to succeed in college. So how can this be different? How will you respond to this call to action? That is our real question for you, and we're gonna have you get into some breakout rooms to sort of talk about that. Please feel free to email me about using this toolkit in the future. But we really hope that we start to see it pulled out at meetings and printed out for your particular stakeholder group and used to really make some bold moves moving forward. So I think that Mercy is going to dismiss us now to some breakout rooms to go a little deeper.
Yes. So as you see in the prompts, we want you to take about 15 minutes in the breakout rooms. So go ahead and give your introductions as you get in. And then we would love for you all to reflect on what you read, if you were able to read the report, or what you heard today from our things and the recommendations. And then linked in the chat where are the toolkits actions. So what will be 1 or 2 actions that you could adopt or adapt to for your organization and your role with where you sit? One thing that the research team really wants folks to walk away knowing is that we all have an opportunity to do something from the spaces that we sit in. So that's what we want you to step into, that the breakout room and looking at the toolkit with that lens. With time, we're actually going to shorten the breakout groups to about 10 minutes. So get in, get talking, but we're really excited to listen and hear what folks are able to think of after today's conversation. So I'm putting into the chat the guidelines, and then do we have breakout rooms beginning?
Shannon, did you have the breakout room set up?
Kyla.
Yep, they are ready to go. So I'll send you off now.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, I see we have some folks still hanging with us here. Kyla, are we getting them sent to rooms, or is this a room?
Can you pause the recording?
Yes.